He got 4-star reviews. For talking a little bit about salt and light. And in effect, what Jesus is doing is commissioning his people to be a people of enthusiasm and to be a dynamic people that go into the world and share this beautiful gospel of love and all-encompassing gathering in. So now we're stuck with today, aren't we? These pieces in the Gospel of Matthew have been so misconstrued and misunderstood over the centuries that they've come out on the other side. We have that fiction of annulment with Rome, as if divorce was somehow an unsavory thing and that only the wedding didn't really happen for $500. Well, it happened. That's my Protestant shot at Rome. We are, after all, a Reformation church. Jesus said that he came to fulfill Scripture and not to eradicate it. And Matthew is going to great lengths to say this is true, that Jesus is fulfilling the prophecies and the Torah, which, by the way, doesn't mean law. It means teaching. Does that change it for you a little bit? It means teaching. Torah means teaching, not law. We often tie the two, the law of Moses, which is actually Torah, which is actually teaching. It's a little bit different thing. So what is Jesus driving at here that leads us into these places? Well, what might be the first step to Jesus of murder, right? Murder is a bad thing. We all agree with that, right? What Jesus is saying is that the first step of murder is discord, disunion, anger. So you heard that piece about if you're in enmity with your brother, and I would add sister, leave your gift at the altar, go therefore, and reconcile. Reconciliation is what stops murder. You see the connection? If you're reconciled and you're not standing in enmity, in anger with the other, there's got to be a first step to every action we take. Now, I would say the first step to murder in New Orleans is poverty. Okay? So what Jesus might be saying is, if you have wealth and do not share it with the poor, if you have control of the economy and do not make room for others, if you do not teach your young skills and trades, if you do not encourage them and love them despite of their circumstances, you will have murder, and murder is a sin. And so who bears the sin of murder? I'll leave that with you. Divorce. He talks about divorce here. Well, divorce, of course, we Episcopalians will rush over very quickly to make it okay for you guys. We're going to explain to you that divorce in that day and age, the writ of divorce given to a woman basically marginalized the woman. I suggest to you the woman was marginalized before she even got there. But nonetheless, if you were divorced, that simply meant you were free to marry somebody else and to make bed with them because you were still okay. And what might lead to divorce? Well, we hear in this that the law says that it is adultery. But Jesus says, if you lust, you've already taken the first step towards that writ of divorce. Now, look, I'm in New Orleans, and I'm in a certain community that prides itself in lust. It's Mardi Gras. But there is a difference between lust and love. And I think what Jesus is driving at is akin to what we drove at a few years ago in the Me Too movement. It is demeaning a person to the bare minimum. And the bare minimum is what? Sexual expression. But on its barest form. On its form that reduces another person not to an object to be loved or even appreciated, but simply as an outlet, an object. Objectifying another human being is perhaps the text that Jesus is working with here, and he's actually raising the bar from Torah. He's in Midrash. Midrash is a Jewish discussion of the law. Matthew is in a very Jewish community, so they're in constant conversation with the orthodoxy of Judaism over here and the revelation of Jesus over here in Syria. And they're in conversation with each other. And remember, this is after the temple. So these conversations take great theological weight in Judaism, both for the birthing Christian community as well as the post-priestly community of Judaism. And they're trying to sort these things out. And what Jesus is saying through the voice of Matthew is that divorce isn't the way to go. And the first step to divorce is lust. When you look at another person, see them. You know that phrase we're all using nowadays, I see you. I see you. And Jesus is saying, see them as a whole thing. Don't hear me say that sex is bad. It's not. It's part of our humanity. It's part of the condition of most mammals. It can be fun. I see a few of y'all smiling back there. Be a lot of fun. It can be expressive. Sexuality can be so many things. I'm talking about charas, sex, not our self-identity. It can be revelatory. It could be adventurous. It can be relaxing. It can be exciting. But what it must be is honoring. You must enter into this relationship with honor and regard and with care for the other. And so Jesus raises this bar of care for the other. I think if Jesus was in the 21st century, he'd be marching with the Me Too movement. I really do. And deconstructing these operative mechanisms which developed over the centuries to objectify women in particular, and other members of our community. As people come out, there are certain portions of our community that objectify and judge, instead of simply saying, God made you, I love you. What's so hard about that? Can you all say that? God made you, I love you? Oh, give it a try. You all sound like you haven't had a cup of coffee yet. And I know better, and you got parades. Bet you're going to say it loud. Hey, throw me something, mister. Yeah. God made you, I love you. There you go. If I had a beat, I'd throw it at you. Oaths and swearing were a topic at the time. They were. There was a lot of controversy going on during the time when Matthew is being perfected and when it's being written, and this is a big discussion. How do you properly make an oath? Now, oaths were made before the altar of the temple. They were done in the temple. So it's temple behavior being carried on after the temple, right? We do that to this day. That's a sanctuary. That's not. You're in the court of the Gentiles. True. That's church architecture. So what Jesus is saying is, instead of getting yourself bogged down in the weeds about how to make an oath, don't. Don't try and perfect this word play, this word salad that will be acceptable at the temple. Rather, let your yes be yes and your no be no. It's as simple as that. We were talking about core values in class this morning, and one of our members offered a core value of truthfulness. We might also say transparency and authenticity. How much would our world, or what would our world be like if we were all very honest and authentic, and we did not fear for ourselves in our truth-telling? That we lived in a dominion that allowed people to say the truth without anger, without hatred, and without judgment, but simply to be authentic, to live into what God has created us to be in the fullness of ourselves, to see another person not as an object, and therefore to enter into an engagement with them that honors the full person. To truth tell, to find that transparency where it is safe, where there are no more closets to hide in, because you are you. God made you, and we love you. What a society this might be. And so you see, Jesus has gathered all of these folk in, most of whom have been objectified and marginalized and hurt, and they're sick and they're ill. And in that day and age, on the Sermon on the Mount, if you were sick and ill, that was God's judgment against you. When Jesus is saying, no, God is here to heal and to be with you and to walk with you and to abide with you. And he created you. They created you. It's perhaps a better pronoun for God. We need to get away from that he thing a bit, don't you think? Yeah. So the Sermon on the Mount is taking the law, refining the law, nuancing the law, so it's not used as a bludgeon, but it is used as a moral foundation for how we behave, because Christianity is a behavior among many other things. Or it should be. What, are you afraid I'm going to give you that father lecture at this point? I'm not. We're in this boat together. We really are. I mean, I'm wearing brocade and you're not. But, you know, when I go home this afternoon, I'm going to be held accountable for my actions, as are all of you. What Jesus is trying to nudge us into doing and trying to nudge those people into doing is to look at the heart of the truth of the Creator God who loves and loves abundantly. And to give us tools to be able to express this thing that we call love. You know, love thy neighbor as thyself is a really tough one, isn't it? I mean, we priests go back to that all the time, and you might too. And in our community, loving thyself seems to be the major obstacle that so many of us run into. I mean, are you operating out of fear? Are you operating out of some sense of desperation that somehow you're just not good and you got to make up for that? Are you operating out of a sense of the looking in the past and saying, I didn't do these things properly, maybe I'll try and do better now and make up for that? You can't make up for history. It's history. You have to live today. And you will be judged on the merits of your life today. Anybody in recovery will tell you this. Dekasad, the sacrament of the present moment. I mention that several times a year because I think that's one of the most beautiful things I ever heard. When you have sex, make it a sacrament. It's an outward and visible sign of an interior and spiritual grace. That's the definition of a sacrament in the Episcopal Church. That, an outward and visible sign, a sacrament is an outward and visible sign of a spiritual and inward grace. Outward and visible sign of your interior care and grace. Take that definition into your boudoir with you. Honor the other. It can be a servanthood ministry to serve the other. Didn't think you were going to come here and have a sermon about sex, did you? You know, we ignore it too often and we sure dodge it. We priests are terrified of it. Well, sort of. But the man's talking about it. And so we need to, too. It's part of humanity. He's talking about lying. He's talking about being angry with people, leading to what? Raising the stakes, mutual assured destruction, zero-sum gain. I'm right, you're wrong, that's all there is to it. Is that how we want to be as a Christian society? I don't think so. And I know Jesus didn't want that. He wants us to be a community that values the other. When he's on that mountain, that's what he's talking about. The value of our human condition and the value that each other must find in one another. Because when you value the least of those that you see, you will equally value yourself and begin to learn how to do it. And then when we learn how to value ourselves and we value the least of these, we start living in a value-added world which says all human beings have the right to be honored and provided dignity. And when that happens, these systems of poverty and economic depravity, and then ultimately anger and a sense of self-worth, which then lead to murder in a gratuitous way, begin to crumble before our very eyes. And you know what? What'd you hear Daryl say last week? You're bearing witness to that at St. Anna's Church. You're bearing witness to that at Anna's Place Nola. You're bearing witness to that in the food pantry. You're bearing witness to that in the homeless ministry. You're bearing witness to that when you carry that message into the world. You are your own Sermon on the Mount. So climb up to that great mountain and continue this great work. Walk out of here energized and ready to go to spread this gospel of nonsense that nobody's going to want to buy into. Oh, you Christian hypocrites. Yep. What you got next? Walking the walk is part of how you are defining yourselves as a community. And trust me when I say that's different than other communities that lay the same claim that we do. Not all communities, but some. And you're on that mountainside with Jesus, taking his words and bringing them into the world. Let's face it, we're like the first church. We're starting all over again. We had to hit a giant reset button as Christians. And you're part of that reset. That ought to be exciting. Who of you will be Peter and Paul? James and John? Who of you will be Mark? I know you will. Apostles all. Amen.